650 people arrived. 650 people yesterday arrived into Dover, and last I heard this morning, there are many more boats on the way today. That will take us up to about 52,000 people since this Prime Minister and this government came into power. The mood in the country around this issue is a mix between total despair and rising anger. And I would say this, that without action, without somehow the contract between the government and the people being renewed, without some trust coming back, then I fear deeply that that anger will grow. In fact, I think there is now, as a result of this, a genuine threat to public order, and that is the very last thing that we want. And I've been saying, of course, for a long time, that it's a growing threat to our national security. And we've seen just recently some arrests made of people that came by boat, and they are suspected of being involved in some form of terrorism. Huge numbers of undocumented young males who throw their passports and iPhone into the English Channel when they get to the 12-mile line, something that I've been out and filmed. These huge numbers of people do constitute a threat. And I suppose the growing anger in the country over the course of the last few weeks is a cultural one, in the sense that many of these young men come from countries in which women aren't even second-class citizens. And frankly, the public have now just had enough. And what began as a protest of mothers and concerned citizens outside the Bell Hotel in Epping has now spread right across the country. And all of it really poses one big fundamental question. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of women and children being safe on our streets? Or are you on the side of outdated international treaties backed up by a series of dubious courts? The Channel crisis began with a trickle of dinghies in 2018. The numbers in 2018 and 19 were very small indeed. But I began to realize in early 2020 that virtually nobody that came via this route was being deported. They would have been, even in Tony Blair's government time. If you'd done that, you would have been deported, no question about it. And so in early 2020, I repeatedly went out into the English Channel, filming what was going on, saying you may as well put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover saying everyone welcome. And unless we start deporting people, I predicted this would turn into, and yes, I use the word, invasion. But 180,000 people later, what other word could possibly describe what has been going on? It is an invasion, as these young men illegally break into our country. Well, I did my best in 2020. I warned everybody. I said, unless we deport, the crisis will worsen considerably. But I'm afraid that the Conservative government, for the first few years, did literally nothing. Literally nothing. And then belatedly, they put in place a Rwanda plan, they put in place legislation, but none of it could work because they hadn't got the courage to face up to the legal obstacles that made sure, despite spending huge amounts of money on these plans, that nothing was actually going to happen. Rishi's Stop the Boats was a total failure, and frankly, anything that party or people who were ministers at the time in that government have to say, we've got to take with a very, very large pinch of salt. And then, of course, we had Keir Starmer, the lawyer, the man whose second speech as Prime Minister in the House of Commons was where he outlined his love for the European Court of Human Rights, a party many of whom have done very well out of the human rights industry. Smash the gangs was never, ever going to work. And even as we speak, despite the £800 million we've given the French, even as we speak, there are French naval vessels escorting these boats across to a 12-mile line where they'll be picked up by Border Force or our volunteers for the RNLI if it's a busy day and Border Force simply can't cope. And now what happens is the French give them all life jackets. And when they're picked up by Border Force give the life jackets back to the French so they can reuse them on the next journey. I mean, we're literally witnessing two governments colluding in their support of criminal activity. Well, this issue has become a scourge of modern Britain. Just think about the hotels. Think about the houses of multiple occupancy, and not just the cost of it, but think how unfair that is. Unfair to the 1.3 million British people currently on the social housing list. Unfair to those who have legally made their way into the United Kingdom. It's unfair. And the cost, frankly, is eye-watering. Official figures show the whole thing costs about £7 billion a year, but that doesn't account for the massive scale of operations in the English Channel every day. It doesn't account for the amount of police time and court time that is taken up with crimes that are committed by those who frankly shouldn't be here and have come illegally. Our proposals will save, over the course of the next decades, tens and possibly even hundreds of billions of pounds. By the end of a first Parliament, we will have saved a huge amount of money. I understand the public have had enough of this, but here's what we have to do to make Operation Restoring Justice actually work. We have to leave the ECHR, no ifs, no buts. It may have been a good idea 80 years ago. Frankly, it isn't today. We have to repeal the Human Rights Act of 1998, brought in by a Blair government, many of whose families seem to do rather well off the back of it. We will, for a 5-year period, disapply the 1951 Refugee Convention and any other barriers that can be used by lawyers in this country to prevent deportations, to prevent the right thing from happening. We'll create a legal duty for the Home Secretary to remove those that come illegally. And crucially, we will detain all illegal migrants who come, and we will do so immediately. The only way we will stop the boats is by detaining and deporting absolutely anyone that comes via that route. And if we do that, the boats will stop coming within days, because there will be no incentive to pay a trafficker to get into this country. If you come to the UK illegally, you will be detained and deported and never, ever allowed to stay, period. That is our big message from today, and we're the first party to put out plans that could actually make that work. We will stop the boats from coming. There'll be no more incentive to pay traffickers. Public trust will be restored, and we genuinely are the only party that can be trusted on this. I am the only party leader that has been clear and consistent on this issue over the course of the last 5 years. And I have a feeling that what we're doing today with Operation Restoring Justice is going to be very popular in the wider country indeed. Now, to go through some of the operational phases we're going to need to go through and the structures we're going to need to set up, I'm going to invite Zia Youssef onto the stage.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you all for coming. Look, for decades now, successive Tory and Labour governments promised to get tough on illegal immigration. And yet, year after year, tens of thousands of fighting-age males, as Nigel said, have arrived on our beaches. In fact, the total number of illegal immigrants in the country now stands at least 1 million. The true number could be considerably higher than that. There's little doubt that the United Kingdom is being invaded. In fact, more people have arrived on our beaches illegally over the last 8 years than stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. And they're rewarded for this by a political class that puts them up in hotels at the British taxpayers' expense, given free meals, free healthcare, free TV licenses, and as our Doge team has revealed, even free trips to the safari park and to the cinema. Even those that commit heinous crimes are routinely defended by so-called human rights lawyers who succeed in preventing even convicted rapist illegal migrants from being deported. All thanks to a legal system that prioritises the rights of foreign citizens over our own. Well, the patience of the British people is now exhausted. We're unwilling to accept that Britain's borders should be open and undefended, unwilling to accept that Britain must cede its sovereignty to foreign courts, and unwilling to accept that our own veterans who served our nation with valour and distinction be evicted from their homes to house fighting-age males from Iraq and Afghanistan who turned up on our beaches uninvited. This is a national emergency. It's a national security emergency, and it's time to put British people first. So, upon winning the next election, a reformed government will launch Operation Restoring Justice, a 5-year emergency programme to track down, detain and deport all illegal immigrants in the United Kingdom. It will also immediately stop the boats from coming by sending a very clear message that being in our country illegally now has an ironclad consequence: immediate removal. Deportation is the ultimate deterrent. Our plan combines an uncompromising legal reset with national-scale, relentless enforcement through a new UK deportation command and a powerful foreign policy campaign. As Prime Minister, Nigel Farage will direct every instrument of state to ensure illegal immigrants are detained and deported. Reform will pass the Illegal Migration Mass Deportation Act to ensure that no activist judge can stop deportations. We will leave the ECHR, but that is nowhere near enough to get this job done. We must also repeal, not disapply, but repeal the Human Rights Act and replace it with a British Bill of Rights. We'll create a legal obligation for the Home Secretary to deport everyone illegally in the country, and will disapply all international treaties that are used to keep illegal migrants in this country. And yes, that means disapplying the 1951 Refugee Convention and the UN Convention Against Torture and the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention. That is a non-exhaustive list. These treaties will otherwise be used by activist judges to frustrate deportations, even after the repeals of the Human Rights Act and even after the UK leaving the ECHR. We will create sweeping new detention powers for the Home Secretary without Hardiel Singh constraints. That means illegal migrants can be detained until they are deported. This is essential because activist lawyers routinely use Hardiel Singh to secure their client's bail, after which the client disappears. And we'll pass a law that makes clear that if you came to this country illegally, you will never be granted asylum. End of story. This will mean all asylum claims will become inadmissible if made by a person within this Act's scope. So if you came to the country illegally, you'll never be allowed to stay. It strips the Home Office, the immigration tribunals and the higher courts of jurisdiction to even consider asylum claims, because a claim that cannot be considered cannot suspend removal and therefore cannot delay a flight. Nothing less than what we've just described will do. And when Nigel's Prime Minister, there will not be a lawyer nor a judge in the country that will be able to prevent a deportation flight from leaving. If you come to the UK illegally, you will receive a lifetime ban from ever coming back to our country. Re-entering after deportation will become a criminal offence, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Deliberately destroying your identity documents, having come here illegally, will also become a criminal offence, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. We will pair this legislative reset with a UK deportation command. That is a dedicated force to identifying, detaining and deporting illegal migrants at scale. We'll create a cutting-edge data fusion centre that will automatically share data between the police, the Home Office, the NHS, the DVLA, HMRC and banks. This will allow Deportation Command to relentlessly track down and detain all those who entered our country illegally. We'll build capacity to detain up to 24,000 illegal migrants at a time. That enables us to deport up to 288,000 illegal migrants a year. Detention will mean deportation. No chance of bail, no chance of absconding. We will expand charter flights to 5 departures every day, and to guarantee success, His Majesty's Royal Air Force will keep a Voyager aircraft on standby as a hot spare. So even if a plane has mechanical issues, flights will not be stopped, deportations will not be delayed. And beyond our shores, our Foreign Office will act with the urgency of a nation that is determined. Return agreements will be secured. Countries of origin will take back their illegals. Where persuasion and financial incentives fail, we will use leverage. If a country refuses to take back their illegal migrants, we will stop issuing visas to people from that country, and if necessary, we will sanction them. Let there be no doubt, those who arrive illegally will be detained, deported, and banned for life from re-entering the United Kingdom. And this is not just a national security emergency, it's a fiscal emergency too. Right now, Britain is spending more than £7 billion every year on the costs of illegal immigration, and that excludes the huge cost items like the burden on the NHS. Billions are spent on hotels, community housing, and welfare for those who have no respect for our laws. Those who obey the rules are forced to pay for those who break them. The cost of deporting those who are illegally will be £10 billion over 5 years, but in that same period, our plan will save the taxpayer over £17 billion. So the net saving to the British taxpayer will be very, very significant over 5 years. And over a decade, the savings will exceed £42 billion. That is money that is returned to hard-working families, to our schools, to our NHS, and to rebuilding Britain's prosperity. This is a transformative plan that will mean those who are here illegally will be deported at unprecedented speed and scale. And I want to be clear that with Nigel as Prime Minister, a reformed government will show unflinching resolve to ensure that Britain regains control of its borders. The hopes and the dreams of British people and their children rests on their government's willingness to do what it takes to defend and secure our country's borders and keep them safe. A reformed government will ensure that the United Kingdom will once again be a proud sovereign nation with full control of its borders. And it is in that sovereignty that lies the foundation of our country's next chapter. One in which our country is secure, one in which our people are prosperous, and one in which Britain is powerful again. Thank you very much, and we're going to move to questions.
That side, maybe
I'll go this
easier.
way.
This is my hearing. Zia, thank you very much indeed. Right, we have a pretty extensive list of questions from the press, and the first up is Ben Wright from the BBC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farage. Your plans could mean sending thousands of asylum seekers back to countries where they might face imprisonment, torture, even death. Does that bother you at all? And what happens if countries refuse to take people back?
Does it bother me? Of course, it bothers me, but what really bothers me is what is happening on the streets of our country. What really bothers me is what is happening to British citizens. What really bothers me is, and you've seen this from the Bell Hotel onwards, the growing concern with justifiable evidence that women and girls are far less safe on the streets than they were before this began. So it's all about whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the British people or international treaties? Now, where countries, and I think Zia laid that out, that it's going to be a carrot and stick approach to it, but if we can't get deals with certain countries, then we think this country has considerably more muscle, diplomatic muscle, than perhaps those in Westminster currently recognise, then we will have to find other locations. And, you know, we're going to be talking to Albania, we'll talk to Rwanda, we will find solutions. Catherine Foster from GB News.
Thank you, Catherine Foster, GB News. Nigel Farage, last September you told GB News that it was a political impossibility to deport hundreds of thousands of people and that you simply couldn't do it. What has changed your mind that you now believe that you can?
The political impossibility was deporting millions and millions of people, and that's where the argument had gone. We had a situation, a political difficulty within Reform UK. This does happen to parties. They do have difficulties and problems. We had a problem that one of our MPs, who's no longer an MP, was talking about deporting entire communities, including people who've been born here. And frankly, we found that unacceptable. And so I just did not want, I think you can quote me for another interview, to get dragged down the route of mass deportations at that stage. We have sorted out that political internal difficulty that we had, and since that time, the work has been done on a credible plan so that we can deport hundreds of thousands of people over the 5 years of a Reform government. Thank you. Harry Horton, ITV.
Thank you very much. Harry Horton, ITV News. Nigel Farage, you've said that you can't be held responsible for everything that happens in the world. But if someone says that if you deport me, I'll be tortured, I'll face abuse, surely there is some responsibility on you to stop that from happening. And secondly, if I may, how far back does this go? Where do you draw the line? You say you're going to deport everyone who's arrived here illegally. What are the parameters for that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, how far back you go with this is the difficulty, and I accept that. You know, and the next question that Zia and I will get asked is, what about those that are here illegally and have got children? So, you know, I'm not standing here telling you all of this is easy, all of this is straightforward. You know, and we had, of course, with the Windrush row, we had a situation there where people who'd come 50, 60, in fact, nearly 70 years ago had faulty paperwork. So there is an exercise of common sense that has to come in here. But do we realistically think, Zia, we can deport 500,000, 600,000 people in the lifetime of the first Parliament?
Totally, yeah. I mean, so look, one of the key points to make here is if you look at the population who are illegally, and by the way, this is difficult because you're trying to count the uncountable almost by definition. You're talking north of 650,000 adults without children who are in this country illegally. And by the way, those are the ones the British people are most concerned about. They're the ones who in some cases are terrorising local communities, hanging around bus shelters. Let's start with deporting them. Let's get that done promptly and efficiently.
Yeah, and of course, once we start this, people will not in future be coming to Britain illegally. The precedent for this is Australia in 2012, where within 2 weeks of Tony Abbott taking the right actions, the boats stopped coming from Indonesia. The solution to this is not difficult. It's been the lack of political will to put in measure the right places is why we're now in this position where, as I said earlier, the public are between a mixture of utter despair but increasing and growing anger. Serena Bankin-Singh from Sky.
You've said that you're going to detain anyone who arrives via small boats. Will that apply to women and girls? And what about unaccompanied children? Will they remain in Britain while their parents are turfed out? And then you said you would leave the UN Torture Convention. Australia and the US haven't done this. Are you comfortable of the risk of people being killed or tortured if they're sent back to their country of origin? And will pulling out of these international treaties lose UK credibility on the international stage?
Well, we're talking about disapplying for up to 5 years a variety of conventions that do need broader debate and certainly at a UN level need reform and change. As far as the ECHR is concerned, we're very much of the view that it's a body that they say is separate from the European Union, but I could walk from my office in Strasbourg straight into the European Court of Human Rights. They're joined at the hip. I don't see any prospect, frankly, in the short term, of the ECHR being reformed. Now, you might argue that Germany, who now, of course, have a whole series of deportation flights set up. You might argue that Denmark, which now has a zero asylum policy, you might argue that, well, if those countries can do it, why can't we do it? But, of course, the problem has been our own judiciary. We have to remove the tools from our own judiciary for them to be a barrier to this process. And yes, women and children, everybody on arrival will be detained. And I've accepted already that how we deal with children is a much more complicated and difficult issue. But you know what? The people protesting outside the Bell Hotel and at 30 migrant hotels on Saturday around the country weren't doing it because of the few children coming. They were doing it because over 3/4 of those that come are young, undocumented males who come from cultures that are entirely different from ours, who are very unlikely to assimilate into our community, who pose a risk to women and girls, and some of them, I'm afraid, pose a risk to national security. So that's pretty clear, I think, what our priorities are. Paul McNamara, Channel 4.
Hi, Mr. Farage. There is a realistic possibility that if you go forward with this, there might be a case where someone arrives in the UK by a small boat, you send them back to the country from which they came, and they will be tortured or killed because of a decision that you've made. How does that sit with you?
Well, the alternative, of course, is to do nothing. I mean, that's the very clear alternative, is we just do nothing. We just allow this problem to magnify and grow. We head to a point and I genuinely, I'm not, I don't want this to happen. I want our proposals to be accepted so that we can prevent civil disorder from happening. But that is the direction this country is headed in. And we cannot be responsible for all the sins that take place around the world. It's just literally impossible. But we can recognise that the primary duty of a British government is to protect the integrity, the safety and security of its own people. That's why we have to do this. I mean, Zia said in his speech that nothing short of these measures will work. And I think we all genuinely believe that. If we allow any loopholes to remain open with this, it isn't going to happen. Is this a perfect world? Are these things all that we want to do? Well, we shouldn't have been put in this position. Well, we've been put in this position by Conservative and Labour governments. We have to do something tough. We have to do something radical. And this is a plan that will work. Andy Bell, Channel 5 News.
Thank you, Andy Bell, 5 News. So if you're able to implement your policy, do you accept that that means border force agents going into towns, looking for people who are here illegally, maybe who already have families, maybe who already have children? And you mentioned the Windrush earlier and say, well, this is slightly complicated. There are going to be any number of people who, as far as they're concerned, have been living in this country legally for years, who will then be very, very worried about what your party has in store for them. Are you not concerned about the sort of message you're sending out with all of that?
No, they won't have been living here legally, will they? They would have been living here illegally.
So, for instance, the people caught up in the Windrush episode, the whole point was that their situation was not clear. So would they be covered?
Windrush was a mess over paperwork. Yep, and I understand that. It's why I made mention of it earlier. Will Border Force be seeking out people who are here illegally, possibly many of them working in the criminal economy? Yes, it's what normal countries do all over the world. It's what normal countries do. I mean, what sane country? What sane country would allow undocumented young males to break into its country, to put them up in hotels? They even get dental care. How about that? Most people can't get an NHS dentist. This is not what normal countries do. We are talking about normality. And actually, the funny thing is, I'll say it once again, in the first Blair government, if you came here illegally, your feet didn't touch the sides. But it is this gradual drift. Ever since, really, I think the Human Rights Act was incorporated into UK law, it's this gradual drift to just accepting that anything goes. Well, we're not accepting it. And I tell you what, there's a big silent majority out there who are not accepting it either. And they are crying out. They are desperate to have some leadership that's got some courage. They're desperate for a political party that can put forward people who genuinely will put the needs of the British people first. That is what government is supposed to do. Thank you. Christopher McCowan from the Press Association.
Thanks. Chris McKeon, PA. One of the countries you suggested sending people back to was Iran, a country which poses a national security risk to the UK and has attempted to kidnap and murder people in this country. What financial incentives are you suggesting you offer them to take deportees back?
Can I be clear that no young man from Iran who arrives by boat should be walking the streets of our country? Under no circumstances. Absolutely no way, never. That shouldn't be done. But actually, it's quite interesting that Germany now has this massive deportation flights going, including Iran, I think.
Well, what we're seeing, one thing I just want to very quickly make about when we're talking about returning people to Afghanistan or returning people potentially to Iran, or I was asked earlier today, would you send young women, would you send women back to Afghanistan? Well, what about the fact that men from Afghanistan, because it's predominantly men from Afghanistan and Iran are streaming across the channel illegally on almost a daily basis. In fact, sometimes they say, would you send them back to, quote, woman-hating Afghanistan? Well, why are British women being subjected? Because it's not the women who are coming. In fact, most estimates put the total population of women and young girls from Afghanistan in this country legally at less than 2,000. Less than 0.2% of the total illegal migration population. So these are totally bogus questions, frankly, and we should be talking about the much bigger issue about the safety of British women and girls.
Yep. Okay. I think one of the most interesting things about this press conference and about the media the last few days is the questions that are being asked about the practicalities of individual pieces of implementation. What I notice, there's very little pushback from the media against the idea that we really are in very, very big trouble in this country. And I think every one of you know, it was interesting, I thought Andrew Neil's piece in the Mail on Saturday was very reflective. I think everyone understands we have a massive problem here. We are not very far away from major civil disorder. And so I think the acceptance as a whole of the big picture that we're putting forward shows you that once again, it's reform that are leading national debate. Noah Hoffman from The Sun.
Thank you, Ms. Farage. Noah from The Sun. You were just mentioning there about this growing anger, this seething anger at Sir Keir Starmer for what some people think putting the human rights of foreign rapists above British families. But there's still around 4 years until another general election, and a lot of people will be feeling very helpless and like they want something to happen quicker than that time. So how would you recommend members of the public should put pressure on a Labour government to do more than just cite human rights laws and actually tackle this issue?
I think that one of the things I've learned over quite a long time in this game is that if you lead with arguments, if you get the public to follow you, the other politicians start to change their tune. And let's face it, this is a Labour government famed for its number of U-turns already. So I would urge everybody out there that's got a Labour MP to go to that MP and say to him or her, unless you get a grip on this, we will absolutely not be voting for you next time round and you will lose your seat. And if that happens on a big enough scale, I think it could be a remarkable effect of concentrating the mind. 4 years to the next election? Do you really think so? I think the 30-year bond market is giving us a somewhat different indication, particularly as we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer dubbed famously by my colleague Lee Anderson as Rachel from accounts, who is clearly desperately out of her depth. And actually, I'm not sure there's anybody in the cabinet that really has a clue how to turn around the economic downward spiral and possibly even fiscal doom loop that we're beginning to enter into. So they may not last quite as long as you think. Martin Beckford from the Mail.
Thank you very much. Martin Beckford from the Daily Mail. We know that Afghans make up the largest proportion of small boat crossings, about 6,000 in the past year. We know that lots of people who work with British and American forces are still trying to flee the Taliban. Would you make any exceptions for them and allow them to stay?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Right. There were brave Afghans who supported the British forces and American forces during that 20-year war, who, of course, absolutely, of course, deserve recompense for the enormous risks they took. And by the way, Martin, you know, just bear this in mind. This country has taken 500,000 refugees since the Brexit referendum. This country is not closed-minded to groups that genuinely face persecution, to groups that genuinely are refugees. We just don't believe, by any traditional definitions of a refugee, we just don't believe those people crossing the English Channel, or at least very few of them, tick that box. Carry on.
Will you have a scheme continue some of the resettlement schemes?
Yes, but of course, once again, the whole thing's been messed up beyond all belief. The list of a couple of thousand interpreters becomes a list of 100,000 people. The whole thing gets leaked. It's a complete and utter shambles. But, you know, where it's right and proper, you know, Operation Restoring Justice would apply to those Afghan interpreters as well. Absolutely. Thank you for your question. Do come in whenever you want.
Can I just very quickly mention, to the degree someone wants to make the case for legitimate asylum claims, as no doubt some may exist, those can only ever be taken seriously when you have a secure border and you actually have control about who's coming. This is one of the biggest problems. I put it to you that an infinitesimal number of the Afghans who are crossing the channel illegally served with our military bravely. It will be an infinitesimal number. We know this. So again, this is a big part of what reform is going to do. If you don't have a border, you don't have a country. If you don't have a border, you don't have an immigration policy. We can talk about it all we want.
Quite, absolutely, absolutely. Michael Knowles from the Daily Express.
Thank you very much. Your operational plan speaks about a 6-month voluntary return window. Can you spell out why you're going to do that and why it precedes the large-scale raids?
Well, because there's a nice way of doing this, and there's a very tough way of doing this. And if people think, crikey, you know, they're breathing down my neck, they're actually going to catch up with me and deport me, I might as well take the offer of £2,500 and a free, comfortable flight back to my home country. Difficult to assess just how successful that will or will not be. But if you think, you know, this time next week, they're going to be knocking on my door, I suggest quite a few people might take that up. And I think that is, you know, that is part of our sort of carrot and stick approach to individuals illegally in Britain, but equally to other countries as well. Yeah. You know, we will try to make it easy. And after all, the countries we're talking about, we're giving nearly all of them foreign aid anyway. So there are ways that we can offer them constructive deals to take back their people, or we can get tougher by applying diplomatic or economic pressure.
Can I just add as well that it's also much cheaper, frankly. I know I might stick in the throat a little bit paying people who are coming illegally, but if you look at the Department of Homeland Security, you've looked a lot at what the Trump administration has done. The DHS have said, their voluntary program's about $1,500 relative to $17,000 for an enforced deportation. And as Nigel said, one of the things that will happen immediately once we pass this legislation is UK Deportation Command will start issuing letters informing them, we know we're on to you, and if you don't take this voluntary program, you're gone forcibly in 6 months' time.
Yeah. James Hill, Spectator.
The risk of a British Bill of Rights is that it simply empowers those same activist judges that you've decried here today. Would it not be preferable instead to simply repeal the 1998 Human Rights Act, leave the ECHR and go back to the old system of legal governance?
Yeah, I mean, common law really is what you're talking about, and that's how we used to do it. And, our tradition has always been that we're free-born people, that everything is allowed, unless there is a law that specifically prohibits us from doing something, as opposed to the more European system of state-given human rights, which incidentally they can withdraw pretty much at a moment's notice. Look, we've used the Bill of Rights as a term because it is an historic term in British history, but it won't be full of European-style human rights. It'll be a reassertion of what the basic liberties are of people in this country. And let me assure you of one thing. It will include the right to free speech, which I'm afraid to say and yes, we all want to protect children, but I'm afraid to say that the recent legislation, the Online Safety Act that has come in, is already genuinely curtailing free speech in this country in a way that I think is deeply, deeply alarming. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times.
Hello, Mr. Farage. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times. There are a very few number of disused or surplus RAF bases. So to prove that this plan is viable, can you name any that you would use, either to hold migrants or to operate deportation flights from? And would they, for example, include RAF Scampton? And if I may, why do you want these powers to sunset after 5 years? Is it because you're concerned they could be used by a future government in a way you don't foresee?
No, because, look, we do think there is hope that the 1951 Refugee Convention at the UN can be revisited and redefined for the modern world. So we've done it for a period of 5 years, and we'll see where we go after that. Can I just make one thing very, very clear? That the last government and this one have been housing people in military bases. 1 or 2 campaigns have stopped them using certain particular geographical locations, but quite a few have been used around the country. So you get put into a military base, but you're free to walk the streets at night. You're free to possibly even go and drive a delivery bike for somebody. The military bases that we will use, people will be detained. They won't be out walking the streets on the road to being deported. So I would suggest to you that whichever geographical locations are chosen, local residents will be far less concerned by this plan than they would young men being free 24 hours a day to walk through their village or walk through their town. On the practicalities of building accommodation, some very interesting thoughts that have come from America over the last few months.
Yeah, look, there's 100,000 square miles of landmass in this country. We're going to need about 1/3 of 1 square mile for the entire detention estate of the incremental 21,000 that we're talking about here. And Trump, whatever you think of President Trump, he has cut illegal border crossings by 97%. They said that it couldn't be done. He has done it. How? Because ICE has gone out and made 150,000 arrests and embarked on these deportations. If you look at the detention capacity he created in Florida, he created 3,000 beds in 8 days. If we were to be able to do it at that rate, we'd have the whole 24,000 up and running in 2 months. That's not in our numbers, but there is modern technology. These steel modular structures, these are all things that we can use. This notion that Britain can't do anything, Britain can't build anything, is for the birds. It's just about the political will.
Yeah, and we managed it, didn't we, at the start of COVID with the Nightingale hospitals, which sprang up in no time at all. So, yeah, creating the first few thousand places can happen very quickly. Of that, there is no doubt at all. Charles Hymas from The Telegraph.
There are currently about 100,000, more than 100,000 people who've got asylum applications, half of whom are going to be rejected. You also got more than 50,000 who've got appeals that are currently going through, and probably a significant number will be rejected. So when you come, if you were to win the next election, you're going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands potentially of failed asylum seekers. Are you going to deport them, and are they in your figures? One final question is, what are the sanctions that you would use against a country that refused to take back its migrants?
Fine. Well, the answer is yes. The worry, of course, is that to ease government's difficulty, it just waves through an increasing number of people. It just says, look, you know, all right, we'll give you refugee status, even though, as I said, 2 decades ago in more normal times, that would never have been contemplated. That is this government's get out to the backlog problem. I'd also mention, Charles, while we're here, if you look at those that have claimed asylum in the last year, the biggest single category comes from Pakistan. And they haven't come by boat. They've come with the excuse they're coming to visit relatives, then they overstay. And that racket, absolute racket, that's been going on for years has to end. The same applies to students who come here and then deliberately and willfully overstay. And one of the most remarkable things about those stats is under half of all people making these claims have come by boat. Overstaying is a massive problem, and neither of the last 2 governments, frankly, have done very much at all to deal with it. There are overstayers now being deported on a relatively small scale, but nobody is actually gripping this issue. We'll give the Telegraph 2 questions, shall we? Did you have a question, Camilla?
Very generous. This is for the Daily Tea podcast. You mentioned earlier that there are 3 million people on social housing waiting lists.
1.3, I said.
1.3. Would it be your policy to have a British first approach to appointing housing when it comes to local areas? Some local areas do look at localism, but others don't. Would that be a blanket policy? And while we're speaking about housing, what's your reaction to the revelation that the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has got an £800,000 second home in Hove? Do you think it's hypocritical? Should MPs have second homes?
So, I would say this to you. Isn't it funny that the residence that Angela Rayner is living in London is now coming under criticism from James Cleverly? He wasn't complaining when Michael Gove lived there. So it's just party politics. And if Angela Rayner has been tremendously successful in business, and managed to acquire a property portfolio and done it properly, well, jolly good luck to her. And this whole sort of hair shirt approach. I mean, I think probably most of the press want politicians in sackcloth and ashes, would like us all to go vegan and give up drinking. Well, it's not happening here. That I can assure you. Do you want to answer the other bit or not?
That was the other bit.
We are opposed to 2-tier justice within our country. We are opposed to 2-tier policing within our country. We are opposed to 2-tier sentencing. We've just seen Lucy Connolly coming out of prison as Ricky Jones walks free. And yes, I know the circumstances were different. But we are pro a 2-tier approach from government when it's deciding who are the priorities for housing, for benefits, for any of these things. Is it British-born people, or is it people swanning in from all over the world? And we are pro British in this country having more rights than those that have recently come. Yes, yes, yes. And in time, you know, I mean, if you go to Australia, you can't access the health system. Doesn't happen. You've got to pay your insurance for 4 or 5 years. You commit a crime, you'll be deported. We've just been so weak on all of this. We welcome those that will come, will benefit our society, integrate, contribute, and in time, become British citizens and have the full rights of everybody else. But I'm afraid that's just not what is actually going on. It hasn't been, frankly, for many, many years. Natasha Clark from LBC. We are getting towards the end, folks, I promise you.
Natasha from LBC. You talk about a self-deport app in your document today. Can you tell us about how that would work? And second, you talk about the risk of unrest on our streets. You obviously know this plan is going to face legal challenges, operational issues, political pressure. Your opponents are going to absolutely throw the book at you to try and stop this. What is your message, firstly to them, and secondly to voters whose trust is absolutely on the floor over this issue? Prime Ministers have repeatedly failed to do enough about this and fix this very tricky problem. We've got years of promises. Why should the public trust you?
Well, you're right. I mean, every Prime Minister since David Cameron has said clearly, if you come to Britain illegally, you will be removed. And they all do it. And none deliver. Although I think they say it because they think the public wants to hear it, rather than they actually mean it. The fundamental point of your question is correct. That the social contract that exists in this country between those that work and pay their taxes and those that govern them is at a very, very fragile moment. That trust in politics and trust in politicians, frankly, it's certainly never been lower in my lifetime, and I think you might have to go back a long way in history to find a parallel period. So the restoring of that trust is absolutely vital. A lot of people around the country who say they're going to vote reform believe that we're pretty much the last shot. Pretty much the last shot. That if we don't win that election and start putting in place some of the very necessary changes that are needed, then goodness only knows what this country will look like in 10 years' time. Goodness only knows how many more talented people will have left. Not just the ultra-rich, but the young, ambitious, hard-working. So it is vital that we do this. All I can say to you is there's nobody on these issues of sovereignty, on these issues of national self-interest, on these issues of predicting what would happen in the future and it coming true. There is nobody more determined to do this than me. Okay, Eleanor Langford from the iPaper.
Hello, Mr. Farage. Just to confirm, are you willing to negotiate with the Taliban and potentially pay them tens of millions of pounds to allow increased returns from the UK? And one more, if I may. Are you concerned that leaving the ECHR could jeopardise the Good Friday Agreement?
Could jeopardise?
The Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah, I mean, look, Blair, of course, wrote the ECHR into everything. He wrote it into everything to try and embed it deeply in British law. Can we renegotiate the Good Friday Agreement to get the ECHR out of it? Yes. Is that something that can happen very, very quickly? No, it'll take longer. It'll take longer. So unfortunately, and for a variety of reasons, previous governments have placed Northern Ireland, I'm afraid, in a different position to the rest of the United Kingdom, something that we vigorously opposed. It will take a little bit longer with Northern Ireland. Zia?
Yeah, so look, I just want to very quickly go back to the question about the app as well, because again, we want to emphasize that the goal is to get as many people to leave voluntarily. And what Deportation Command will make very clear, they will issue dates once they've tracked people down. This is the date that you will be arrested and you will be deported. Going back to the earlier point as well about why should people believe Nigel when so many political leaders have stood in front of the British people and said we would do it? Well, one of the signs that this is going to work is how, number one, the human rights lawyers, the so-called human rights lawyers, are furious. That's a really good positive indicator that this plan will work, because these people, there's an industrial complex. I've seen this in courtrooms, an industrial complex of so-called human rights lawyers who defend the human rights of foreign citizens at the expense of British ones. And to James Heal's question earlier about the British Bill of Rights, I will tell you this. The draftsmen who put this legislation together have been under a very, very clear and strict instruction. When Nigel's the Prime Minister, there will not be a judge in the country that will be able to prevent a single plane from departing. And that is why we are clearing the decks from a legislative standpoint.
Yeah. Anna Gross, Financial Times.
Thank you. You said that we're facing a massive and unprecedented crisis of people coming over to the country to claim asylum. The numbers have gone up. It was 108,000 in 2024, but this was only the 17th highest number in Europe per capita of the population. Are you willing to acknowledge that this is an international phenomenon, that Britain is much less affected than many other countries, and that there are millions of people in the UK that want to provide refuge to those who may be killed in their home countries?
In 2015, the boat started crossing the Mediterranean. Jean-Claude Juncker, who at the time was the President of the European Commission, announced that the EU would put in place a common refugee and asylum policy for the European Union. And I was there through all of it. And I spoke repeatedly in parliamentary debates. And I said, if you allow anyone that sets foot across the Mediterranean to stay in the European Union, millions will come. Do not make this fundamental mistake. Of course, they did. And one of the reasons for voting Brexit was to prevent that catastrophic mistake that was made by the European Union, compounded by Angela Merkel in the most astonishing and stupid way. One of the reasons for Brexit was to get ourselves away from that necessary obligation, in that a few years in a European country, they become European citizens, they could come to Britain. So I've been right about this from the very start, singularly, alone, right about this from the very start. If you make it easy for people to come, they will come. It's just as simple as that. And it is, to the deep regret of everybody, especially 17.4 million Brexit voters and many, many more, that despite the fact we've got back control of our lives, we've actually not bothered to use it properly. We should not be paying for the mistakes of the European Union. Esme Kenny from the Oxford Mail.
Thank you. Esme Kenny, Oxford Mail.
Yes.
So we're not far away from Campsfield House, which is a detention centre which closed in 2018. The current government have said that they want to reopen and expand the site. What would a reform government do about Campsfield House, and how would it respond to the backlash that reopening the site has faced from local residents and the district council?
Yeah, I mean, look, nobody wants a hotel near them. Nobody wants an HMO near them. No one wants a detention centre around them. Well, at the moment, they've got lots of them all over the country. And I'm not going to be drawn. I'm I'm aware of the problem, of course. I'm not going to be drawn on the specifics of any individual geographical location. Because if we were to do that and present it as a plan, what the government would probably do is sell off the site and turn it into a solar farm. So we're going to keep...
It's true. It's actually true.
Well, why not, I suppose, So no, we're not going to go into individual specific geographies. Certainly not at this stage. Okie dokie. Alexa from The Guardian.
Thank you. Elita Addy from The Guardian.
Misspelled, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Your plan promises mass deportations at a cost of £10 billion over 5 years, yet the Centre for Migration Control, which is led by your former colleague Rupert Lowe, proposed a near identical plan at a cost of around £47.5 billion. So why do you believe you can deliver the same scale of deportations for less than a fifth of that price?
Because Zia's really good at maths. Okay, right, now, the last question of this conference goes to David Burke of the Daily Mirror. This is the last one. David, where are you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Farage. Last year you said that Judeo-Christian values were at the root of everything in this country. You've previously called for a muscular defence of Christianity. We saw under the Tories, the Church of England bishops were probably among the most vocal critics of the Rwanda plan when it came to the Lords. It seems, frankly, ludicrous that they'd fall behind sending people to the Taliban, to Eritrea, to Iran and so forth. If you found yourself in a position where senior Christian leaders opposed the plans on moral grounds, are you prepared to say, I don't care, and do it anyway? And if so, isn't there a hypocrisy built into that?
Well, look, I mean, whoever the Christian leaders are at any given point in time, I think over the last decades, quite a few of them have been rather out of touch, perhaps with their own flock. Given the types of people appointed to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, that's probably the biggest understatement of the day. We believe that what we're offering is right and proper. And we believe for a political party that was founded around the slogan of family, community, country, that we are doing right by all of those things with these plans we put forward today. Somebody else asked me a moment ago about the pressures from the establishment that we'll face. Yes, of course there'll be pressures from the establishment. Of course there'll be condemnation from all sorts of parts of society. But no big, fundamental change that advances people's lives ever comes without a battle against the establishment, a battle against the existing interests, as Zia mentioned a moment ago, the human rights industry, etc. Some of this will be hard, but that's why we have to get a proper mandate for it at an election. And it's why I believe that as a result of what we're doing today, the general centre of gravity of this debate will move considerably between now and the next general election. And I think a lot of people who maybe now are criticised, I've noticed actually one or two commentators, who would have been, even a handful of years ago, would have said really quite vicious things in their commentaries about these proposals, are now saying, well, you know what, actually, I can't walk down the King's Road and wear jewellery anymore. Something fundamentally is going wrong. This feeling that we're living in broken Britain. And this is, of course, but one part of broken Britain, but it's the most visible part, and it's the part that is leading to the greatest anger in the country. Right, can I say thank you very much indeed, everybody? Yeah.